The Greater Centerville Historians organized in the year 2000. The purpose of the organization is to preserve the history of the Township of Centerville, Cleveland and surrounding area. Gerald O'Neill, Charlie Bauer, Richard Wiegand, and myself, Kathleen Sixel, were the founding members. In 1831, the territory south of Green Bay was sold to the U.S. government by the Native Americans who had title to the land. The consideration was the promise of a reservation in another state. The Township of Centerville was established in 1850. The township had a village called Centerville. The reason for the hamlet's original name of Centerville was, in the days of the Indians, there was a trail along Lake Michigan between Manitowoc and Sheboygan. This heavenly spot was exactly at the halfway mark, so the early white man gave it the name Centerville. In 1849, the village of Centerville was surveyed and laid out in lots and blocks. The village of Centerville was renamed Hika when the Postmaster General informed the village leaders that another Centerville was located in the state. When it became time for Centerville to be renamed, a judge in Manitowoc by the name of Albert Schmidt would take kids hiking. The judge said, "You can't call a town hiking, so why not make it Hika?" Thus, the village of Centerville became Hika. In the early years, Centerville had the vision of becoming a lake port. To encourage ships to dock there, 2 piers were built into Lake Michigan. Many German immigrants arrived by schooners, and the village began to grow. The village had a brick factory, stores, schools, a Lutheran and a Catholic church, mills, saloons, blacksmith shop, and a fire department, and a brewery. When the brewery was built, the settlement began to flourish. But when fire destroyed the brewery, the largest industry, there was no longer a need for the harbor facilities. So ended this chapter of the development of Hika. 2 miles west of Hika, another settlement known as St. Wendel began to grow. It had a Catholic church, a general store with a connected dance hall, and a post office was also located in the complex, a funeral parlor, and at one time a motel. With the clearing of the forest, tilling of the land began. This prompted the exporting of lumber and grains. The farmers of Centerville looked forward to the building of a railway since they had a serious problem transporting their products. In 1873, the Milwaukee, Lakeshore, and Western Railroad was built between the settlements of Hika and St. Wendel and was named Centerville Station. In 1880, Centerville Station was renamed Cleveland after President Grover Cleveland. Cleveland, at that point in time, owes its growth to the fact that the Township of Centerville was a rich farming community, and farmers from miles around would bring products to be shipped by rail or ship. The village of Cleveland had several grocery stores, a furniture store, a funeral parlor, several saloons, Lutheran church, hardware stores, several gas stations, newspaper, photographer studio, several car dealerships, cheese factory, several feed mills, livestock yard, and lumber yards. The biggest business was the Cleveland Co-op, which offered many types of services. With the failing of grain crops, the farmers began dairy farming. With the abundance of milk, another industry began, cheese and butter making. Local cheese factories dotted the countryside. One-room schools were usually built near the cheese factories, so children would have a ride to school when farmers brought their milk. In 1958, Hika, St. Wendel, and Cleveland incorporated into the village of Cleveland. In 1968, the Cleveland Elementary School was built. The Township of Centerville has seen many farming changes, but dairy farming is still the primary vocation. Today, Cleveland is known as the seat of Lakeshore Technical College, which offers an educational alternative to 4-year colleges. An ancient proverb states, When an old person dies, a library burns to the ground. These words were the inspiration for organizing the Greater Centerville Historians. We hope to preserve as many memories as possible.
Okay, we have a meeting here, and Mr. Barr will start it off in his way, and then we'll continue the normal meeting process. Go right ahead, sir.
Okay, everybody knows how to use the microphone. You have to keep it up here and talk into it, so that's no problem. And everybody here, I'm sure, remembers the good old days. Remember the good old days when you sneezed or you coughed, you put your hand in front of your mouth?
Yesterday?
Today, you don't do that. You gotta sneeze or cough into your elbow.
That's right.
So we got another old-fashioned thing we used to do that we can't do anymore. The other thing, now last month when we had Soaring Eagle here, they talked about a cheese factory in Osmond, and I made my way down to the Historical Society, and I found some information on that. I'm going to put that up for you. And it's the top one up there on the Thomas Rhodes Cheese Factory. And if you read that up there, it kind of explains that. So this one they're talking about up here is the one that's in the Smiling Moose Tavern, and that's where the Fitzgeralds did take their milk. Okay. And the other one that was there was the Schmidt Cheese Factory that was out on Point Creek Road. So we thought we'd kind of clear that up here tonight. And there's one other thing. Last Saturday, Jerry and myself and my wife, we were on what was called Sharing the Past Ride. And I'm going to put that up there. And we did stop at these couple places here. We stopped at the, if this thing works, we stopped at the Lutzy House Barn. And it was a commercial bus. We had 52 people on the bus. And then we went down to Spring Valley. We walked over the dam and got a tour of where the mill site was all at. Then we went to Whitelaw. And part of Gill's Bar is the old church up there. And we learned how they moved that with 6 horses down the Main Street in the dead of winter. And then we went to this beer cave out in Francis Creek, and that is on private property, and it was a little tough to get to, but that was just fascinating. And Jerry did get some good video of that, he tells me. And then we went out to the rock mill, and then we had to walk into the woods there and back out to where the dam was there. Got the whole story on the mill there. And the other thing was the Maribel Hotel. And that was built in 1900 out of stone, and it had 85 rooms in it. It was a beautiful place in its day. And that's all the catching up I got, and I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to start.
What was it, Rock Mill?
The mill.
The mill.
The mill, the grist mill, the flour mill, yeah.
Okay.
That would be a Devil's River, right?
Yeah, Devil's River, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, Fred.
The Maribel Hotel, is that the same as that Maribel Cave? Is that the same building?
It's a good question. It's an all fieldstone building, huge, totally burned out inside. Yeah. And I was surprised that we had people on the bus that were in their 80s, and they did a lot of walking. Okay, I'll give the mic to Gabby.
Okay, I have a young lady here who has been working very hard to maintain a very high level of activity for this group, and she'd like to introduce herself. Go right ahead, please.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome, everybody. My name is Kathy Sixel, and I come from Newton, Wisconsin. And welcome to the meeting of the Greater Centerville Historians. It is May 11th, and we had a beautiful day today. I think maybe it was like 55 to 60 degrees because I worked outdoors all day. And we only have a few simple rules, and they are, please raise your hand when you have information to add. And so Mr. O'Neill can address you. And always state your full name. Use full names when referring to people. Refrain from using nicknames, and don't visit because it picks up on the DVD. And also always pass pictures around. So with that, I'll turn it over to Richard.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Richard Wiegand, and I passed out some silos in Manitowoc County articles. I only had about 10 of them, so you can take them home, whoever gets them. They're available at the Manitowoc County Historical Society for $4 a piece. I occasionally buy a bunch of them. Sometimes I copy them on my own, but I've probably handed out 400 or 500 of those. I wrote it in 1989 along with Walter Vogel from Two Rivers. He refused to have his name on it, so I get the credit, I guess, I don't know. But anyway, we can talk about silos among other things tonight.
Okay, very good, thank you. Okay, we got a gentleman who'd like to identify himself. Go right ahead, please.
Paul Jacoby from Cleveland.
Thank you.
Willard Mathias from Cleveland.
Thank you.
Alice Mathias, Cleveland.
Thank you very much.
Dolores Crest, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Kathy Wagner, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Joe Kress, Town of Mosel.
Thank you.
Walter Crest, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Larry Shermbrook, Osmond.
Thank you.
Laverne Sherbrooke, Osmond.
Thank you.
Edith Woodsey, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Selma Vogel, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Marie Pippert, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Dan Schmidt, Elkhart Lake.
Thank you for coming.
Naomi Schmidt, Elkhart Lake.
Thank you.
Audrey Erdl, Ignatius.
Thank you.
Marie Boland, Town of Sheboygan.
Thank you.
Carl Ziegler, Newton.
Thank you.
Rick Beiersdorf, Town Meeting.
Thank you.
Ellsworth Yeager, Sheboygan.
Thank you for coming.
Will Balance, Cleveland.
Thank you, Will.
Frederick Jacoby, Manitowoc.
Thank you, friend.
Kay Schill, Gwen Biola.
Thank you.
Victor Schill, Glenn Beulah.
Okay, thank you.
Charlie Bauer from Newton.
Okay, thank you.
And to follow up on last month's meeting, we're going to kind of stay with farming, and we're going to kind of go back in time. And now we need the cameraman to introduce himself.
Okay. Thank you, Charlie.
Jerry O'Neill from Town of Newton, and I'm glad to be your videographer for the evening. And we hope for a lot of good pictures and good questions and a lot of information. So I'll take it right back to Kathy to get us going a little bit. Go right ahead, please.
I'm Kathy Sixel, and Melvin Yanik was going to be here this evening to help us, but of course we all know that Melvin is in the hospital right now, and I really haven't heard how well he is. But we'll start then with Richard Wiegand, and Larry Shermbrook is an old farmer too, not an old farmer, but knows older farming techniques with his wife Laverne. They have farmed for many years, so Carl Ziegler is going to help us out a little bit. He knows a lot too, and anybody else? I think so, everybody remembers farming years ago. Okay, Richard, take it over.
Okay, we have a gentleman here who has knowledge of silos, I believe. Go right ahead, please.
Richard Wiegand. As I mentioned, this article was written 20 years ago, and I and Walter Vogel went around Manitowoc County and we took photographs of different types of silos that we found. And of course, you know, when the publication's out, you always find something else you could have put in there. But I just wanted to talk about some of the old buildings they used, and this is the Wiegand farm behind the barn. The silo on the left is no longer there, but the oldest silo that I could date of any of the ones I saw was our stone silo on the right, which was built in 1900. The first silos in Wisconsin came in the 1880s, and I believe the oldest silo in the state is the one on campus in Madison. The Pabst brothers also had a very old silo, but I think that's gone at Oconomowoc. Anyway, a couple of things I wanted to note on there is, you know, they started with stone, then they went to brick, and then they went to other types of silos after that. That big silo on the left has a chimney sticking out between it and the barn, and actually there was a fire pit in the barn in front of the cows where you could light a fire under there, and that was supposed to heat apparently heat the bricks and keep the silage from sticking to the, or keep the silage from freezing to the side of the silo. I don't think that ever worked. But as long as I can remember, when that silo was still there, we would look into that pit and there were ashes and cinders in there. I don't think that had been used for 80 years probably. But we did use that silo even when I was farming 20 years ago. There were double wall silos that had an airspace in between. We found one, but of course you can't take a photograph of it, you know, from the outside. And see the space in there, but that airspace was supposed to keep silage from freezing. Silos that were located on the north side of the building or on the west side did tend to freeze up unless they were wide enough and had enough silage in them. You know, so, I mean, they didn't completely freeze up, but there was always some silage 6 inches or 8 inches along the wall that would stick to the wall. And some people would get killed, you know, when they were trying to take that off. If they let it get too high, you know, in the spring, it would fall on them. So that has happened. Can we go to the next slide? The photograph on the left, there's a hexagon-shaped silo I found north of Two Rivers. On the top, there's an octagon silo at the bottom. That was also Two Rivers. I found 2 of them. And I have no idea if any of these silos are around anymore. And then the one at the very bottom on the left is up in St. Nazianz. That was a former crystal farm. It's a square stone silo. There was a lot of spoilage in those corners, and obviously you couldn't put a silo unloader in a square silo or an octagonal silo and do much justice to it. So they probably built them for about 5 years and, you know, found out there were too many problems and gave up on them. The next page. The silo on the left is a brick silo, and there were a number of those around. I don't remember where that one was. Yep. And I took a photograph of the doors on that silo on the inside. Huge doors on there. Up in the upper right is I think it's a concrete block silo. There were also clay block silos around, and then the one in the middle is a double silo, and you could have 2 silos in one silo unloader. And I think that was the idea behind some of them. They put one roof on. I don't know about that one, but because that looks kind of old. But some of the newer ones, they had double silos, and they had one silo unloader, which you could take the silo unloader across and then lower it down into the other one. And then there's a steel silo at the bottom. That was around Francis Creek somewhere. Next page. There's a glazed block silo on the top, and at the bottom is a wooden. There's another steel silo on the left, and then there's a wooden stave silo, and it shows the construction. There's 3 women standing under there. The Smalley, I think it was the Smalley company in Manitowoc, manufactured those stave silos, and they were popular. Those wooden stave silos popular from maybe 1910 to 1920, in that range. You could put them up in a day if you had your foundation down. They just had a crew of people put them up for you, prefab. Probably the entire silo would fit on a couple of flat rack wagons. Next page. Just some discussion about some of the equipment that was used. There's a corn binder in the middle, and then there's I think it's a corn wagon for throwing bundled corn on. Some of you may have done that. I did that for maybe when I was 6 or 7 years old. I remember using a wagon like that. And then another silo, you can see the types of doors. You can get doors for just about any kind of silo. There's some door maker I heard of, I think in the state of Wisconsin, that makes doors for silos. Next page. On the top, there's 2 different types of silos, one next to the other. you would see a progression, on farms. The one in the middle is Randy Bender's farm, and there's a small A.O. Smith harvester, which was the oldest A.O. Smith in the state. Was built in about not in the state, in the county. It was built in about 1950. The A.O. Smith harvester was an idea that came out of the brewing industry in Milwaukee. They were getting a tour, I think it was during World War II, and a farmer said they were talking about glass-lined vats, for fermentation of beer. He said, that's a great idea for a silo. So A.O. Smith harvester, or A.O. Smith as it was at the time in the 1940s, started putting up silos. And there's, I forget his name, but there's one just south in Sheboygan County, I think, that was built in 1949. And there were a number around the neighborhood in southern Centerville and Mimi. And then you can see on Bender's farm, the concrete state silo, and then another taller harvester, a newer one next to it. Down at the bottom, I was looking for silos in barns. And of course you don't see them unless you know what you're looking for. And I have since found a number of them. Eldon Voss has one, a really beautiful one inside of his barn, which I didn't catch before we did this article, but Willis Voss had the one which was kind of falling apart there in the middle at the bottom. There was a silo in there, and you can tell by the shape of the barn, and there's a peephole on the top where you fill it. So since that time, if you drive up I-43 north of Manitowoc, there is one on the left somewhere that is a silo in there, and I've seen a number of them around. But I was looking for silos in barns, and again, the idea of having the silo in the barn was to keep it from freezing, just keep it a little bit warmer. Okay, the next page. That fellow's name is Roy Schmidt. It's not the Roy Schmidt or the Irvin Schmidt from this area here. He was living north of Two Rivers, and he was interviewed for this publication. He is since deceased. There's a picture of that was apparently a double-walled silo on the right there. I didn't check it out, but they said there were two different, silos, one inside of the other one with an air space. And then the one in the middle is the one I was talking about. That's where you have a double silo and you have one silo unloader. And then at the bottom, I just took a picture of a couple other poured concrete silos that you would find. The biggest silo maker in the area was August Einert and Sons from Kiel. And I interviewed one of the sons. They had already retired by that time. But he said that they had built, concrete and stave silos, poured concrete and concrete stave silos. They had built 2,000 silos in the state. So I got a lot of information from that fellow. Next page. And that's a picture of that somebody took of, filling a silo back in the old days, when you had a belt and a feed cutter. And you just set the bundles in there one by one and ground them up and blew it into the silo. The original silos that were built were in the ground. They were below ground level because they had no way to fill them until they got the power, with the blower in the early 1900s. So the original silos that were made were into the ground, and you had to throw the silage out, which was a lot of work. And then when you could blow it in, then then you could just throw it down. It was a lot easier to get the silage out. Okay, I don't know if you have any questions, but that's all I have to say about that. Yes.
Okay, we had a gentleman here that raised his hand, and he'd like to introduce himself and tell us what he's up to today.
Fred Jacoby. What I was reminded of was that I was one of the original silo unloaders.
You were a silo unloader.
As soon as the farm boys were strong enough to climb up the ladder, that was often their job.
Very good, thank you. Okay, I got a young lady who has a question. She'd like to identify herself, please.
Kay Shell.
Thank you.
Since I'm no farmer and know nothing about it, were there any octagon farms around here with
Barns?
or barns?
Thank you.
Ville, but I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Okay, a question on the floor pertaining to something to do with barns, I believe.
Richard Wiegand, yeah, you mentioned octagon barns, and sometimes to just call them round barns. And there is one on the border of Manitowoc County and Kewaunee County. I don't know, was it Highway 42? It's still there, as far as I know. I don't think there's one in the county anymore. There are some in Sheboygan County. There's one on like J or JJ, west of Johnsonville, someplace. There's one over there. There's some farther south. Not very practical, but sometimes they also would put a silo in the middle of that barn. You know, the architecture is difficult because everything is round, you know, so you got to bend things and I don't know what. But and then you had your cows in a circle, you know, either around the whole thing or at least part of the thing, and then you'd have the pens on the other side. I've been on the inside of a few of these, and they didn't seem to be very workable, and certainly not if you were putting a barn cleaner in it or something like that. It was a little bit difficult. Everything had to be in a circle, everything had to be bent, you know, pipes, everything, you know, elbows and whatnot. So there's a few of those barns around. One thing I wanted to mention about silos is in the early days of the state, we were the largest wheat producer in the United States. And during the Civil War, Wisconsin was the, what do you say, the breadbasket for the Northern Army. We had a lot of wheat in the state. And then when the western states opened up, wheat moved west. And we also had trouble with some kind of rust or something in the wheat, and wheat just fell from favor. But in the early state of Wisconsin, we grew a lot of rye and wheat, and we had oxen before we had horses. We did not have dairy cows per se until maybe, you know, the 1880s. There were a couple of people that were very instrumental in changing the nature of this state. One was William Dempster Hord from Hord's Dairyman magazine. It's an agricultural magazine out of Fort Atkinson. He was also the governor of the state. He was also, when he was governor, also the person who dedicated the brewery in Hika in around 1890 when that brewery was built. The other one had burned down. So Hord was in this town. He and Babcock and William Henry, the first dean of the College of Ag, and Morrison from Morrison Feeds and Feeds, they were all from New York State. And they came to Wisconsin and they just completely changed the face of the state. We started raising corn, but it was the growing season was too short to get corn grain, so we looked for a way to make corn into something else, and we made corn silage. We had dairy cows coming in big time in the 1880s, 1890s. Then we had silage, then we had alfalfa, and then all of a sudden Wisconsin overtook New York as the leading dairy state in the Union until the 1990s when California took over. So there were some key people that were very important in developing the dairy industry in the state and all of the things that went with it, the silos, the silage, and the alfalfa and whatnot. So things changed a lot around the turn of the century.
Thank you. Mr. Wiegand had mentioned that they had been blowing silage up into the silos from quite a while ago, but I seen a replica of something in your area there, Charlie, on your 1/12 scale, and you show something different. Could you talk about that, please?
I could, but I don't have that picture with me.
Charlie Power, and what Jerry is referring to, everyone is familiar with the Schmalny Manufacturing Company in Manitowoc. They made feed cutters, and before they had a blowing device on them, the silage was actually elevated up into the silo. So it went through the feed cutter, it dropped into the elevator, the empty track rode the elevator down, and it came up in an enclosed area on the bottom, and then it would drop into filled pipes in the silo, and these pipes were 3 feet long with chains and ears so you could connect as the silo filled. And the guy would be inside, and he would actually walk around inside the silo because the feed wasn't blowing in there. It went up and it just dropped free flow, so he walked around in there and slowly distributed the silage around to fill the silo up. And when it got to a point where he had to unhook the next set, he would take that off, drop it down the chute, and put some more slats in the chute as he filled it up. And that was the earliest way. And Schmally made that elevator, and it came in 3 12-foot sections. So you would pull it up to the silo, and when you're done with it, you would take it down. And everyone knows here that they used to have a whole lot of these trashing crews that went around. They also had silo filling crews where they could fill your wood stave silo, say a 12 by 40 or 12 by 20 in one day. And it was done either with tractors or with horses. And they'd have a crew out there cutting the grain and putting in bundles, and a machine would drop the bundles on the ground. And then you'd go out there with your wagon, 2 guys would throw the bundles on the wagon, and then they'd take it back to the feed cutter, run it through the feed cutter. You got a guy inside, a couple of guys here. So you probably had 2 sets of wagons. So it was very labor intensive. And the photograph up here, do we have anybody here that worked on loading a wagon? Larry, maybe? Could you explain that? And I don't know, did you work with slings?
Yes.
Could you explain that? I do have a small picture of the slings here that maybe I could explain to the group here, but I'm gonna give the mic to you and you can explain how this hay, because when I go to a show, and the only show I do is the one out at the nuclear plant, and you tell kids out there that are in the middle school or younger that the hay came up behind the wagon, they just look at you like you're crazy because they're so used to seeing a tractor pulling a chopper, baler, and a wagon behind. Here the feed actually came up behind the wagon. You actually drove over the row of hay, and we hope the horses would straddle it.
Okay, got a gentleman here who has a farming degree, and he'd like to talk about the good old days and identify himself, please. Go right ahead.
This is Larry Sherman talking about slings. There was big wagons. There was 3 sets of slings. You put one on the bottom when it was about 2.5 feet up. Then you put another sling in, and then you put another 2 feet. Then you always had three layers. That's what you could haul. Then you went home, and then the carrier up there that you brought the 2 pulleys down. You hooked it on the side, and that would roll together. And it would go up, and then you had a guy up on the side there, and he tripped it when the hay got far enough into the mow.
Okay.
Yeah. And you always had to be careful that rope when you tripped that, it wasn't under when you dumped the hay, or else the carrier would fly clear through the other end.
Okay. Now, I got a question. You say now, when the sling went up,
Yeah.
it took the hay into the mow area.
Yeah.
There were people up in the mow,
Yeah, leveling. Yeah.
and would they trip it at
No.
that point, or would the guy?
There was a separate guy for that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Very good. Very good.
Your barn, you drove in the barn, and there was always little scaffolding and stuff on the side, and there's where you stood and you waited for that. When the hay got that far, then you pulled the rope and it would fly
Okay.
up.
All right.
Yeah.
Another question.
Yeah.
What was the sling made of?
Oh, about 2.5 by 3 inch hardwood and ropes.
And ropes.
Yeah. There was a
Okay.
guy in School Hill that made them.
Do you happen to know his name?
Yeah, Nelson Lutton was my aunt's husband.
And he made
Yeah,
slings
he made slings.
in School Hill.
Yeah.
Oh my
Right
God.
next to the tavern.
Okay. On would that be the road that's now called X or X?
Yeah, no, next to Shadows, Markham Road.
Markham Road. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Very
Yeah.
good. Anything else, sir?
And with the loaders, there was 2 kinds of loaders. There was one with a rope that just had lats, pulled it up. It was windy, you had a hell of a time getting it out. But then the newer ones, they had pedals that went like this, and that pushed the hay much more even up in the wagon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now the ones with the ropes, is that the one we're looking at in the picture where it comes up?
That looks like a push loader.
That looks like a push loader.
Yeah.
Okay.
Looking from here.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a young lady here who has joined us. We appreciate it very much, and she'd like to identify herself and tell us what she's got.
Okay, I'm Laverne Schurenbrook. I want to get back to the silos. I just wanted to say we have one of those wood silos where we're living now yet.
Oh, really?
Okay.
It's, somebody looked at it. They were going to tear it down and move it, but we haven't heard anything since then.
Okay.
And I also have an article here, I don't know if Richard has this, of a silo on the Andrew Kramer farmstead on Cedar Road. I don't know if you have that or not, but we have that. And this is the other,
That's what that silo on our.
this is on the silo on our farm, so.
Okay, now, you got how many silos on your farm right now?
There's two where we live.
Two of them.
Yeah.
And what is their construction at this point?
One is a wood silo, and I don't know, what is the other one?
Concrete.
Concrete.
We don't use
Okay.
them no more.
We don't use neither one of them. We aren't farming
Okay,
anymore.
you aren't farming anymore, but you still have the wooden silo there,
Right.
okay? Was that built before you bought the farm?
Oh, goodness, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Laverne, thank you. Okay, you got a gentleman here who would like to indicate the builder of that wooden silo. Go right ahead.
Yeah, Stanley always told me he built that silo.
Okay.
Stanley Voss.
Stanley Voss did.
And getting back to the silos in the barn, where Brian Kramer's barn too.
There was a silo in the barn?
Yeah.
Where Brian Kramer lives?
Yeah.
And that's on Union
Yeah.
Road?
Yeah.
Okay, very,
I hope Chubby tear that out.
okay. They tore it out of there?
Yeah.
Okay,
When you remodel it.
okay, very good, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, go right ahead and identify yourself, please.
Selma Vogel.
Nice and loud. Okay,
And I am reminded of using the slings in the barn. And at harvest time of our grain, my father would make the shocks, and we'd have to set them all up either in a row or a round bunch of them, and they would dry so that when the engines would come to get the grain run through.
mm-hmm,
So being afraid of not having the threshers come in time, we would go out with the wagon and put the slings on, and you'd have to pack them on the sling
okay,
and then drive up into the barn. We had a track up above,
okay,
and that would come down and pick up that sling and bring it together. And if it wasn't packed right, it'd go lopsided and they'd all fall back on the floor again. So that was our,
You knew you did a good job if you did it right, huh?
if you did it right, yes.
Very good, thank you, Selma, very good recall there. Okay, we had a gentleman who raised his hand, and he said he had a little more information. Go right ahead, please.
Okay,
Hold it. Your name, please?
Charlie Bauer. And right where this red dot is, this is one set of slings here. And the length of this would be the length of the wagon, which is probably about 18 feet. And this end here, and this end here, and this is the mechanism that's in the barn. You see these two pulleys or these hooks down here. You would hook one in one end, you'd hook the other in the other end, and as the unit makes its way up to the car up here, this would fold together and you'd form a big round bundle. And the trip rope was in the center here. And this rope, the guy down on the wagon would hang on to. And he would step on the side, because when you're working with slings, you would have three sets of slings. You start with the empty wagon, you put one down. And as Larry was saying, when the wagon gets so full, then you gotta take another one off where you had it hanging on the wagon and lay the sling out again. And again, the third time. So when you had a wagon full, you actually had 3 pulls on there when you unloaded the wagon. And the one they show up here is for hay. And she was talking about grain bundles. Now, the sling unloaders and the cars that you see here, that was the first thing they used them was for the bundles of grain. And you needed a grain sling for that. With a grain sling, you had much more webbing in between here. You could use a grain sling for hay, but you couldn't use a hay sling for grain. Like she said, the bundles would fall through. And these were very short-lived because they were clumsy to work with, and you can ask Larry about that. You trip on them when you're rolling the hay out and unloading the wagon and all that. Most of you have seen the ones up on the left there, the harpoon ones. These up here you see hanging in barns all over. This is another one they call a claw. And these are miter unloaders that were made in Ashland, Ohio. There's another one, Eagle was made in Appleton. There was another one, a Luton, and I forget where that was manufactured. I had a gentleman by my place last week, Wednesday, and he's got a collection of over 300 different styles of hay unloaders and slings and forks and things like that. So there's some interest in collecting some of this old stuff. The other thing now, once the wagon and the field was done with the loader like this, once the field was clean, they went out in the field with a device like this, and a dump rake. Can somebody explain how that worked and what the purpose of that was?
Okay, we had a gentleman who had his hand up. He'd like to identify himself and indicate some information. Go right ahead, please.
Well, the dump rakes were used in a couple different ways because they came along before everyone had a side delivery rake. So some people used them to make windrows, and then, but some people also used them to clean up. Before there were side delivery rakes, they would just drive with the hay loader along the mowed swath of hay, 5 or 6 feet, but it didn't pick up that clean, and so then you use this and you drove across the field. When it was kind of full, then you dumped it. You stepped on a foot pedal, and that caught in the dog in the wheel and lifted it up and dumped it, and you tried to make a kind of a straight roll. So there are different ways of you use that.
Okay.
I have some other things to add. The slings, I haven't thought of slings in a long time, and we never used them. But it seemed to me that one of the best things about slings was by listening to the grown-ups talk about them, it expanded their vocabulary greatly. And then the glazed silos, there were 2 of them there in the neighborhood right by us, and one was in the Andy Kramer farm. That was Fritz Sigelko, and his brother Louis Sigelko, which is now where Dennis Grodegood lives. They each bought one. The one where Dennis is, that silo was the casualty of Rollo Sigelko's barn fire in 1949, but the other one is still there. I'm thinking the advantage was the glazing clean and the ideal glass. Yeah, Richard is acknowledging that that's probably the reason why.
Okay, could you give me a location road-wise of these particular
Well,
sites?
the one that the Sigelkos had, where Dennis Grodegood lives now, is just on the Lakeshore Road, just about a quarter mile north of X.
Okay.
And the Fritz Sigelko farm, where Andy Kramer is known as Andy Kramer's place now, and somebody else is living there now. You see when you go down the I road, and that's just about a half a mile. If you're on the I road and look west, about a half a mile north of X.
Okay.
You see that one.
Okay.
It would be on Center Road.
Center Road, okay. That's just right there.
Thank you.
200 yards maybe. Then I have a comment about the elevators. The elevators were considered very useful in the days before we had these powerful farm tractors. They used stationary gas engines of 6, 7, 8 horsepower because an elevator took much less power than a blower. And then when they had more power and then the feed cutters were bigger and that all worked different.
Okay, very good, thank you. Okay, we had a gentleman who raised his hand. Go right ahead, please.
Richard Wiegand. This is not recalling stuff on the farm. This is some more background history. Most of you know that this is the 200th anniversary of the birth of Abraham Lincoln. Also born in 1809 was Cyrus McCormick and Charles Darwin and Edgar Allan Poe, among other people. And I would remember stuff like that. But Cyrus McCormick was the one who invented the reaper, which enabled large tracts of land to be of wheat or grain, whatever it is, to be harvested with a horse-drawn device. Before that, they used to use a cradle, which I don't know if we have a picture of it here, but used to use a cradle to harvest grain.
Okay, cradle. Could you explain that a little bit more as far as, is it a scythe and a...
It's kind of like a scythe with a basket on it, and you swipe it across the ground, and you gather, I don't know, about 3 feet worth of grain in there, and you have a sort of a bundle, but it's just a pile, and then you dump it out, and then you go to the next swath.
Okay.
I don't know exactly how they did it, but the point I wanted to make was, at some point, the knotter was invented. And the knotter was invented by a fellow in Janesville named Ogilby or Oglethorpe or something like that. I can't quite remember. And he was working for, I think, Alice Chalmers. It was an equipment manufacturer. And when the round bales came out, remember those small round bales that were made? They had strings on them. This was the first, twined or stringed. I don't know if they used. I think they used wire originally. At least this was the first knotter and it was invented in Wisconsin, and this company made these, I think it was Alice Chalmers made these small round bales, but the knotter obviously had, application to the binder, because, then they would tie the bundles of grain, and the same thing with the corn binder. Or I should say the reaper and the corn binder also, after a while, had a knotter on it. And so these things were bundled, and then you could handle them a lot easier.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we got a lady who raised her hand. She'd like to add some information. Go right ahead, please.
Kathy Sixel, and we had an elevator at home when we still had the horses, and that was a wooden elevator. And there was nothing inside the silo, so you had, as the silage came down, you had to spread it all over. And I happened to be the one that had a bee, and I was pretty small. And the silo got full. I got it to the top, and it got full. And my dad wasn't watching, and it ran out. And that's how full it got under the roof. And I didn't have enough, intelligence to climb down, down the well, it wasn't the ladder. It was on the inside, right, with the slats in there.
Chute, huh?
Like the chute, and then a big pile of silage came running out of the silo. And we also had slings at home. And my dad was always up in the mow, and he would swing them with a pole so that the hay would go way to the end of the barn. So it had to be tripped just so, or it would have hit him and went on top of him. And that's about it that I can think of right now.
Very good, thank you. Okay, got a gentleman here who raised his hand. Go right ahead, please.
This is Larry.
Thank you.
I remember my dad, he had a elevator for the feed cutter too. And the feed cutter was on skids. Pulled
Okay.
in line, and he had an old gas engine, 10 or 12 horse, big flywheels.
Okay.
And after that, we got a feed cutter with a blower. Man, oh man, was that something?
That made things happen, huh?
Yeah. That's what all I want, the saddle filling.
Okay, very good, thank you. Okay, I got a young lady who raised her hand. She's got a few words to add here. Go right ahead, please.
Laverne Sharonbrook.
Nice and loud.
I can remember driving the horses with that loader in the back, and you were piled with hay over your head, and they dug you out when you got home. And then we had a fork that they put in on the load up in the barn, and then we had horses hooked onto that fork, and then I always had to drive those horses. And then if you drove too far down the road, the darn thing went up into the roof, and you really got chewed out. And if you didn't keep it strong enough, then they were mad at you too. So darn if you do and darn if you don't. But that was always a job with pulling these forks of hay up into the mow, and then the carrier took it over and it was tripped, and then they leveled it off up in the mow.
Okay.
Edith says they did that too, so it wasn't only me. Thank you.
Thank you. Good. There's something to say, and she'd like to identify herself. Go right ahead, please.
Edith, let's see, and I know I always ended up that I had to put the fork in. That was my job.
Up on the load?
On the top of the load.
Okay.
And then if that wasn't, some of the hay didn't bind the way it should, then some of it came back down too. But you always had to keep on putting that fork back a little further every time.
Okay.
And then it went up into the mow. I don't know who always drove the horses. I think my mother-in-law drove the horses, because I know I always ended up on the wagon.
Very good.
Good, thank you. Okay, I got a young lady who raised her hand and she'd like to tell us something she's got in mind. Go right ahead.
I'm Audrey Ertl.
Thank you, Audrey.
I used to help on the Richard Litzy farm. I could have been about 12 or 13. And a lot of times my job would be to drive the horses. And no kidding, where you sat, it was just a little board and you couldn't move, you had to just sit there. And Litzy's farm was up one hill and down the other. And I went down the hill and then I had to go around the corner and up. And the wagon started squeaking. And I got panicky and I pulled on the horses and they wouldn't go. And they were yelling at me. And somebody finally went in front and led the horses around because I just panicked when that wagon was squeaking because I was afraid it was going to tip over.
Okay. Was that one of those high wheel things, not a rubber tire wagon?
No, it was an old wagon.
Yeah, okay.
But I could have only been 12 or 13 and you sit up there and you can't move because it's a little board and there's not any place to go. And he just keeps coming down on top of you.
Thank you. Very good recall. Thank you. Okay, I got a young lady who also raised her hand, and she has some recall of the past, and she'd like to identify herself, please.
I'm Naomi Schmidt,
Thank you.
and I can remember the fork too. And then I also remember that it seemed like they always had like a little incline in front of the barn. And that's where the horses, or after a while a tractor, and then you go so far and then it would, I got a picture.
You do? Well, that's good.
This is 1938.
Oh, okay.
And this is my dad.
Can your husband hold that just a minute?
Sure.
I'll go right to the picture and just hold for a moment.
And it says 1938 in back here.
Okay.
And that's the big load of hay.
Yes,
My dad
I
on
got
top.
that, yes.
And you see, and there's that small incline.
Okay.
And then they would put the wagon in there in the barn.
Yep.
And down that little small incline, the horses would go, or later on a tractor.
Okay. That was an approach to the top of the barn or to that floor.
That's correct.
Okay, and I gotta get a shot at it. Yeah, it brings back a memory. Well, very good. And you had to do the driving of that, or?
That's not in 38, no.
Okay.
But after that, I did with
After that.
with the tractor.
Very good, thank you. Okay, we had a gentleman who raised his hand, and he's got some more information. Go right ahead, please.
We used,
Hold it.
Fred Jacoby.
Thank you.
We used hay fork to unload our wagons, and once in a while, when you were supposed to drive the horses real slow, or later the tractor, so that when you lifted up and it would catch the trolley or car on the top,
Okay.
it caught in there and then start proceeding.
Okay.
Once in a while, it would trip if you hit it too hard. And then you heard a discouraging word. And then another skill that is probably pretty rare now was these hay ropes. They're about 1 inch in diameter, something like that.
Correct.
Every once in a while, they would break. They develop a weak spot, and then you had to call and wait for someone. Bill Taple was #1 rope splicer.
Really?
Yeah, they wove it together. They opened up the, I don't know, you call it spiral.
Yeah.
Back about 10 inches on each side, and then the skill was to weave them all together again. And Bill Taple was one of them, but there were a number of farmers could do it.
Okay.
Do the same thing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we had a gentleman had his hand up pertaining to some information. Go right ahead, please.
Paul Jacoby.
Thank you. Thank you.
I can remember, I think the years my brother in service, with cutting corn and cutting grain. No. Well, I found it more fascinating to ride the binder than drive the tractor. And I had lots more fun on the binder doing that than getting hollered for that for not going straight, so it was easier.
Okay, thank you. Okay, got a gentleman who will identify himself and provide some more information. Go right ahead, please.
Richard Wiegand. I'm surprised by the number of women that have a lot of experience with putting up feet. I guess I was under the misconception that women didn't do that kind of thing, but obviously they did. The other thing is when Frederick was talking about making those splices, I've actually seen them in the old ropes. I wasn't sure how that was done, but obviously you couldn't put a big knot in there because it wouldn't go through the pulley.
Right.
So you had to splice these ropes. I'm wondering if Charlie has any photographs of any of the tracks in the barn, or the doors on up in the peak on the end of the barn, because you can see these all over the place on these old barns where there was a door in there, and they'd open that up, and that's, you know, if you took the hay in from the outside.
Yes, okay.
Rather than from the inside, then you run it, you know, through that door and then down the track.
Okay.
And we have a track, you know, on the Lewis John Wiegand farm. We have a track in our barn. I never saw it operate, but it's in there.
Okay.
So we should take a break here, Kathy says. So
all right.
Take a 5-minute break.
Very good. Okay, I got a young lady who would like to talk about some old pictures. She'll identify herself, please.
I'm Naomi Schmidt,
Okay.
and this is my dad. Oops, Bruno's ill. And this is where he was with the horses. He had the grain binder.
Okay. Looks
And-
like wheat of some kind.
Yeah, oats.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next
And then
picture.
after a while, he got a tractor, and there he's standing next to his tractor doing the same.
Same thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Much handier.
Right.
Thank you.
But I remember with corn, that when we had like a corn wagon where you put the corn on, what do you call
Bundles?
it? Bundles?
Yes.
He always liked the horses better than the tractor, because you wouldn't have to get up and
Yeah,
down.
just
Track
say-
the horses, you could just say giddy up, ho,
Yeah, yeah.
gee, and haw.
Yeah.
I don't remember what was right and what's left, but one, I
It worked.
can't recall, but it worked, right.
Okay, another picture.
And that is an old picture. That is a milk separator
Okay.
and an old wash machine, which was run with belts on an old line shaft.
Okay. Okay, very good. And next picture.
And that is where they must have tested the milk. It's
Oh.
on the bottom, and that, it says Madison, Wisconsin on there.
Okay.
So I don't know, they must have tested.
Tested the milk there. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, good.
And this one also says 1938 and back, and that's my dad. He's hauling out manure on a sled.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they must have taken the fork and they spread it out by hand.
Sure. Oh, sure. Very good. Thank you.
That was work.
That was work. Either way, loading and unloading.
That's right.
Okay.
And then later on, well, then they got a manure spreader,
Okay.
and that's with the horses. So that was a little bit
A
easier.
little bit easier. Thank you.
And that's pictures of him in an old
Oh, cutter, huh?
cutter, right?
Oh,
Mhm.
nice.
Must have been back in the 20s.
Sure. Thank you. Good.
And there's another picture of him.
Look at that.
That's how they
Nice
got
rig.
around, right?
Nice rig. Thank you. Okay.
And this is a picture of the cheese factory, the one in Cloverleaf, where they all
Oh,
got,
really?
yeah, where they took their milk.
Yeah.
You see all them farmers
Is
standing
that
with
on
them.
Union Road?
Right, correct.
Wow. Nice picture.
That's across the road from Brian Freeman.
Okay.
And that's another
Another shot?
shot. Mm-hmm. But
Wow.
just a little different.
Super. Good.
And that's a picture of a barn dance. That was after the Yaney barn burned down,
Yeah.
and then they had a big barn dance,
Okay.
and we got a picture of that.
Okay. Good.
And these other ones must be from a museum that we took, this old tractors.
Oh, the old, was that looked like a steam engine there, right?
Right, I don't know what they all are.
Good. Thank you.
But with these horses, I can remember my mother always, that's another one like that.
All right. That's good.
But I can remember my mother always saying, well, she came from the town Herman area. But they said they'd go to Sheboygan with their horses, and they'd stop at a tavern. Great Gables, right at the outside of Sheboygan. She says, and everybody get a little shot of Kimmel to keep them warm, to get back to Hards Grove again.
Well, I'm sure there was no heaters in them things.
That's correct.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you for bringing them along. Okay, we got a question on the floor for this gentleman. He'll identify himself and tell us what direction are we talking about in G and Hall. Go right ahead.
Larry Shamrock.
Thank you, thank you.
What I can remember driving horses, Haw was this way and G was that way,
Okay, so G was to
to the right.
G was to the right?
Yeah, and Haw was left.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And we have a picture here. And it's in your young...
That's just to show you that I can cut hay too.
Oh, yeah.
With the horses.
Young lad out there. Yeah, I see a little few spit bugs on your lips.
Yeah, cutting peas.
Oh, cutting peas,
Yeah.
okay. Okay,
Here-
good picture. And we got one more, I believe.
Here's when, that's what we did when we had extra silage. When the
Okay.
silage was full, we blew it on the pile.
Blow on a pile, sure.
Yeah.
Okay,
Those were our bunkers those days.
yeah, that's right. Thank you. Okay, got a young lady who has something to add to the meeting here. Go right ahead, please.
As Selma was saying before, that they took the bundles, the oats bundles, and put them in the mow. We used to do that too, pack them all in the mow, only we didn't use a sling. And my mother used to be on the binder, and my dad and my sister and I would set up the shocks. But then the tractor came, and then we no longer went to work and put them in the hay mow, waiting for the thrasher crew. We just did shocking. And after that, then we got our own thrashing machine. So then we would thrash right off the field.
Okay.
But one of the things that happened was I drove the tractor and my mother was on the binder. And my dad was going to show me how to, shift going up a hill because, our farm was all hills. And while he's showing me this, the seat breaks off of the binder and it drags my mother. And going up a hill, how dangerous that was, but it turned out pretty good yet. So you have a lot of incidences happening on a farm.
Yeah, thank you. Very good. And you can identify yourself, please?
Richard Wiegand. Naomi provided 3 photos up there. The one that we're focusing on the top is apparently a threshing operation inside of a barn. I mean, it's a little hard to tell, but the wagon looks like, a oats or a shock wagon. And there's guys up there with forks and they're throwing it into a threshing machine. Down on the left, to take that one, okay?
Yes.
That's a photo that Naomi says comes from North Dakota. 1924, and they always have to do things bigger and better because there's, they got so much open land out there. That is a steam tractor pulling 4 reapers.
Wow.
4 different reapers, all with one operation. And that is a photograph of a threshing operation outside, and there's a mechanical, some kind of engine. Is it an oil pull or what is it in the center of the photograph? And it's running a belt, or I think it is. I know it's kind of hard to see there. Maybe they're just setting up. And then the threshing machine is off on the right. We don't have a good picture of a threshing machine here, but I am one of the younger people in the room here, and actually one year when I was growing up at the neighbor's farm, I got to participate in threshing. And I was on top of the wagon throwing bundles into this behemoth of a machine, and there's these arms that come out and pull the shocks in, and occasionally somebody got killed by that if you'd fall in there. It was a really dangerous machine. A lot of belts and pulleys and no shields on them. Of course, OSHA would have a fit. Nowadays, with a machine like that, it would never pass muster at all.
Okay, we're still at our Greater Centerville Historians meeting, and this gentleman will identify himself. Go right ahead.
Charlie Bauer. The photograph that's up here is a very typical farm, 1930s, 1940s. You can see it's a gamma roof barn, silo, and a team of horses pulling a load of hay. And the other thing I'm going to put up here, and we didn't talk about it yet tonight, but we're going to. We talked about setting up a trashing machine inside the building. And the way the trash machine works, once the bundles go through, there's a pipe that blows out the waste, the straw. Now, if you set it up inside of the barn, usually they set that pipe up so it would blow into a cyclone. And the cyclone was nothing more than a great big giant inverted funnel. It was larger on top and smaller on the bottom. And what that did was it took the wind out of the straw. It just went around and around and around, and it dropped out, and it dropped into what they referred to as a bale press, or a hay press, or a straw press. And then they were running both of these at the same time, because as Thelma was saying, everybody didn't get their grain bundles trashed on the day they had to be trashed, and if winter was coming, you got bad weather, you get the grain bundles in the barn to save your grain. And then the trashing crew had to come and trash them from 1 mile into the trash machine, or like Richard had the other picture up here, where they were actually trashing in the barn.
Okay.
But that was a hay press there, and they're tied together with wires, and that was about a 2 or 3 man operation. And this one is being run by horsepower. This actually is the gear in here, and the horses walked around that operated the bale press.
So the horses are attached to a rod?
Yes,
or pole?
There's a gear here, here's the shaft that goes. So they actually stepped over the top of this and walked around in a circle.
Really?
Yeah, that's called a horsepower.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, a gentleman had his hand up. Go right ahead, please.
Richard Wiegand. The threshing machines that I have seen, we were just making loose straw and blowing it into the corner of a straw mow. We weren't baling them or pressing them or anything like that. I never saw the pressing operation. But the threshing machine had 3 different things coming out of it. One was straw, which was, there was a blower blowing it through a pipe into a straw mow. There was grain coming out in some kind of a bag hold or bag chute. On one side of the threshing machine is where you got, or you could also have an elevator or something running off of that, taking the grain into a grain bin, maybe even a pipe, I don't remember, there's a blower on there for that. And then there was a weed cleaner part of it too, where you had to pull weed seed bags off every once in a while, because it would, separate the grain from the weed seeds, and then you'd have to pull those bags off.
Okay.
So that was my job, taking the weed seeds off, I remember.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Okay, we got a lady who raised her hand. Go right ahead, please.
Kathy Sixel, and when our barn got full of straw, we had a straw pile outside. They blew it outside on a big pile. And one of the things that happened at our house, my dad used to get what was called thrasher fever. They begin to shake real much in the evening, and I think it probably was an allergy to the weeds and from working, in the straw.
Okay.
I don't know, did anybody else get it in their home?
Okay.
Thrasher fever?
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Okay, got a gentleman who raised his hand, and he's about to provide more information. Go right ahead, please.
Fred Jacoby.
Thank you.
Well, after the grain was cleaned and it was elevated to the top of the machine and then put into a bin, and it was like a scale, and you could set that for whatever kind of grain you were thrashing. And if I recall correctly, it held a half a bushel. I think a half bushel was what it dumped.
Okay.
And then would run down either into an elevator or into bags.
Now, when it dumped, there was some gearing involved to get a number?
It would trip. It would scale and then trip.
Okay.
And then it would run down a chute.
Okay.
It was just trip, open up real quick.
Okay.
I wanted to comment about the barn thrashing in the earlier days. They used to have the equipment, the thrash machine would be on the middle between 2 barn floors many times. An open barn floor, and a mow on each side. And then they put the bundles in one side, and then thrash out of that mow, load a straw into the other mow, and maybe until they had more room there.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't fun because it was dirty.
Dirty.
Rusty.
Yeah. Terrible. Rusty, yeah.
Should I go right on with that? Hey, they follow pretty good. What I got here, and Charlie's projecting, are some receipts, and they're really easy to read. They were saved by my father-in-law and his wife, Vernon Levina Dersch, in the first years when they were farming. And I think the first one says 1937, and what did he buy there? Oh, a double disc. Double disc Carol for $97 from Cleveland Hardware, Bill Taple shop. And then on the right, he bought a McCormick Deering's spreader. Does it say, look, $150?
Yep.
Yeah. And that was also in 30, is that 37, I think?
Yep.
Yeah, October, March and October. Okay, put some other ones up there.
That one's new.
Oh, that was new, okay. I'm a drill on the left. And he's got fertilizer drill with a grass seeder attachment and a 3-horse hitch. So you had to buy these 3-horse,
Eveners.
that's right, eveners. And the price was apparently $235. Gave him a little credit for his old seeder. Then on the right, oh, that's the tractor, the new M. I thought of that with the Fitzgeralds. I'm going to send a copy of that to the Fitzgeralds because they got a new one too, but later, and it probably costs more money. He bought this in April of 1940 from Bill Table, but it was a 39 model, and he and I never talked about it, but I know the tractor because now a Yost bought the tractor and now his son has it. And he restored the tractor. And there's a certain way that certain parts were cast and numbers cast into the castings that I know it's a 39. At least experts have told me it's a 39. But see, he bought it in April. And the price was $11.73, I think. And he was allowed something for the old 1020.
$548, I think it says.
Oh.
Credit.
And then the net was 600 something then? Is that right?
Yeah.
And he told the story to me a couple times. He had the option at that time to buy a starter and lights on it and would have cost $50. And he thought, well, you know, young man, you don't need that. He said, well, the dumbest thing he ever did in his life, not to buy the starter and the lights for $50. Later on, Gary Lutzy on the Union Road had that M. Then on the left, a new grain binder. I can't see the date on that one.
35.
Yeah, okay. For $195, an allowance for the old one, $10. And then a McCormick corn binder. And the price is down below $165 with a $10 allowance for the junky one. That's all they're worth for parts. Once in a while, I suppose somebody use them. And then, this is later, and I'm not sure of the year, and I was disappointed that Irene wasn't here tonight, because she probably typed this up. And he bought a whole chopper outfit because he was going to do his harvesting with a chopper. And here you see on the bottom, he traded in the corn binder and the fink cutter and a wagon on the deal. And he went into chopper thrashing, which some of you might know what that was. You cut the grain in a swath and then you drove down. But after he did it for 1 or 2 years, I'm not sure, this is about 48 or 49, he ran into a rainy harvest season and it was a nightmare. And that was the end of it. And so then he bought one of the first 12-foot self-propelled Massey Harris combines in the area and traded most of that in except the wagons. So it's an interesting thing that he saved those receipts. Along those same lines, my father bought Amsted's demonstrator Ford Ferguson tractor in October 1941. And I think the tractors at that time might have sold by themselves for about $700, $800 in there, $775 something. And it was Amsted's demonstrator, and he bought it with the plow for $500. And that was Amsted's last tractor before the war. These pictures were taken, I figured out in the late 40s. And on the wagon, you see Herbert Schutte, where a couple farmers would work together and baling and putting the hay in the mow. And we had an elevator there up into the barn and a load of bales and so on. Nothing special there, but just what we did. Old family picture in Dakota on top. That's me in the white coat on the left, so I'm pretty small. My mother was from South Dakota, you might recall. And then they're there. And then the pictures down the bottom three are from the fall. I'm pretty sure they were taken in the fall of '54. I left for the Army day after Labor Day in '54. And that's Paul on the newer Ford tractor on the bottom right. And my father on the wagon with a cousin from New York State. They came out every year for a couple weeks. And then Gilbert Bussy's John Deere tractor and chopper on the left there. And then, they're blowing in a pile, which Larry mentioned earlier, because it apparently was a lot of silage, more silage than he anticipated, and so the silo was full. And then another interesting thing, what they did was, and Willard might remember this, for I think $5, the fire department would come with a load of water. And you remember that at all, Willard? I've got some receipts. They put a load of water from the fire truck on top of the silage pile to help it pack and be more wet, more moisture.
Okay.
That's about it, huh? Yeah, that's our farmstead in the middle. My mother and the cousin from New York on the top. Oh, baby picture of me on the right, upper right. Down the bottom chopping corn. And then that looks like one of our relatives' families. If it doesn't fit from Dakota, it doesn't really. That's it.
Thank you.
Where Bud Albert Jacoby lived.
And what road was
Picture
that
from
on?
long ago.
What road was that on?
Point Creek,
No. Well, Point Creek Road,
Yucca Creek, and
east and west, but the highway, what is it? Is that R out there?
141.
Or Dairyland? The old 141, yeah.
Okay.
What is it now?
Westfield.
Okay, yeah. And the funny thing about it to me is, the trees kept growing up all over. So that picture was taken a long time ago. By the way, the north end of that house was the original Jacoby house, and that's logs.
Well.
I remember one time when Bud was living there, they wanted to put a picture window in on the front of that part, and they had a much harder time than they expected.
Thank you. Okay, go right ahead, please.
Naomi Schmidt.
Thank you, Naomi.
And I was going to say, sometimes the women didn't get enough credit because when there was thrashing time, I can recall some of my dad's brothers, they all on one thrashing machine, they go from one to the next, and the women had to do the cooking. The women, wherever farm they were at, they had to make the meals, plus they had to help on the barn later on too, with the milking.
Okay.
And one thing I can always remember when the I always call the thrashing through, when they came in to eat, the first thing that went off their heads, their straw hats went out, they went on the front porch, they never sat at a table with a hat on.
Okay.
And I can also remember my sister and myself, we always had to work in the granary, because they had these elevators in the granary, we had to work in there. And I guess we really must have been dumb and naive, because we didn't know what the word allowance was.
Oh, no.
Because we just did it. We didn't ask, thought we had to get paid for it. That's all I have to say.
Very good. Good thoughts. Thank you. Okay, got a young lady here who would like to say a few words. Go right ahead, please.
I'm Audrey Erdl.
Thank you, Audrey.
I remember when they were talking about the straw, the overflow of the straw went on a pile outside, but I remember there were some pig farmers that had frames outside, and then the straw would be blown on top of this frame, and then the pigs would have a nice place to get in out of the weather.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Good job. Okay, got a gentleman here who has a picture up on the display here, and he'll talk about it and identify himself. Go right ahead.
Larry Shermer. That's me cutting peas at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Okay. Was that drawn by horses? I can't
Yeah,
see.
2 horses.
2 horses.
Yeah.
Okay.
Years ago, all the farmers had peas. They were cut by hand, loaded by hand, and hauled down. And the vines were hauled back home, spread on the field, and dried, and hauled in the barn for feed.
Okay.
So at least we did that.
Okay.
Yeah. The other ones,
Okay.
oh, the other ones are just your dad's, Laverne's dad's horses. I
Okay.
guess she must have liked horses.
Do you know the names of those horses yet?
God, no.
Maybe Laverne does. I don't know.
Well, there was a lot of queens and dukes and daisies and Pat and Mike.
Now, there we go. Thank you. Okay, we have a young lady who raised her hand and she'd like to identify herself.
Edith, let's see. I can remember when we bought the farm, we had more horses than we had cows. And we had a team of horses that they were called Duke and Dan, and you could let them stand anywhere, any place at all, until you would say, giddy up, then they would move. They wouldn't move at all.
That's what it is. That's what it was about. Thank you. Okay, a gentleman raised his hand. Go right ahead, please.
Fred Jacoby, I'd like to add something about the cooking. When the threshing crews were there, those ladies, it had a lunch at about 10 o'clock in the morning, a bunch of sandwiches out to the men. The men didn't come in, and coffee. Then there'd be a big dinner, and a couple pies, lots of good stuff. And then there'd be a lunch at about 4 o'clock, and then always a couple men had to go home to their respective farms and do the chores and milking.
Great.
And then there'd be a meal again at the end of the day in the evening when we're all done, like 8 o'clock, I don't know, depending on how things went.
Right.
And the men's part in that was, I remember, right after breakfast in the morning, the chicken that was served was fresh. Right after breakfast, it was my father's job to kill maybe half a dozen roosters, and then they'd be dressed and in the frying pan within a very few minutes.
Good
but the ladies cooked around the clock. It was something else.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you. Okay, got a gentleman here with a display on the screen that's unusual. Go right ahead.
Yes, Charlie Bauer. And Fred was talking about the many times during the day that they ate, and you can see here we got a schedule laid out from Sunday to Saturday. The only time they ate 3 meals was on Sunday. the rest of the time they ate a lot. And the only thing that's got me puzzled on here that I never seen before is cotton soup. Anybody know anything about cotton soup? I'm assuming that was the seeds. It couldn't have been the fiber.
I don't think it was the seeds either.
You don't think it was the seeds either?
No, they're...
I'm just totally lost on that. Everybody ever hear that?
There's something called gossipol in cottonseed that can be toxic. Maybe if it's cooked, it's okay, but I have never heard of people eating cottonseed.
Okay. Well,
They ate a lot of bread, though. A lot of bread, a lot of cheese, jam, jelly, coffee, just about every meal, eggs, potatoes. So the women were busy.
Yeah.
And the 2 pieces do come apart.
And that's wood?
That is all made out of wood. And there looks like there's a wood dowel here. The first thing I identified on here was the walker.
Okay.
Now, that's the closed version when it's closed.
There's 10 holes. You can put your fingers in there.
And here it is when it's open.
That's making shells.
So anybody got a good guess? We tossed this around, it must have been what, 2-3 weeks, Jerry, before we came up with an answer?
Well, I didn't come up with it.
And it was kind of a homegrown device here, but it was something that most gentlemen did.
Cigar holder.
There you go. It's called a cigar press. You would roll your cigars, and you could roll 10 at a time, and you notice one end is pointed. This is the end that would go in your mouth. And you'd put them in there, and when you clamp it together and let it dry, it would hold its shape. And I got that information from Peg Harder down at the Historical Society, and she actually had one in her desk drawer, and that just floored me that she had one of them.
Very good, Charlie. Thank you. Okay, got a young lady who raised her hand. That means she's got information to share. Go right ahead, please.
I can remember when the
Your name, please?
Kathy Sixel.
Thank
I
you.
can remember when the thrashing crew came. They came in early in the morning, like 4 or 5, and you had that old wood stove, and you had a baked bread, and you were nearly done with one meal, and then the next lunch was again, and they would stay overnight, and they just slept outside. And they'd wash their hands, but I mean, they were dirty at that time, but they just ate with the dirt. But you had to work as women. It was hard. Can anybody else remember doing it when you had a bake? And we didn't even have an ice box, so then you just took the milk and the butter and you put it in the top of a cheese thing and you put it in the basement on the floor. Is that what you guys did too?
Thank you. Okay, go right ahead, sir.
Richard Wiegand. I wanted to mention a couple of the hazards. I was talking about OSHA not approving the threshing machine, and there were some hazards involved with all of this, just like there are today with the equipment we use. And one of the things, the corn picker probably took more arms off and caused more injuries in the state of Wisconsin than any other piece of equipment that was ever invented. Because it would get blocked up and people would leave the thing running and they'd get out there and try to pull the corn out of that thing and end up not being killed but losing an arm. Okay. And that happened many times.
Could you describe the function of the machine so they could?
Well, the corn picker was, you would drive down the row of corn we're talking about the tractor one now, because if you had a horse one, it wouldn't be running. A tractor one, and it would cut the corn and pull the corn in and take the cobs off.
Okay.
Okay, so corn picker, or even the corn binder could be dangerous too, but it was the corn picker.
Okay.
It would take the cobs off, put them in a wagon, and yes, you had these rollers in there. And you could get your arm or you get your sleeve from your jacket or something caught in there, and there you go. Very dangerous piece of equipment. Another thing, of course, when power takeoff shafts came along, tractors operating equipment behind the tractor, and you have this turning thing. A lot of people have been maimed and killed by a PTO shaft. Very dangerous. It's a lot safer than it used to be because of the shields on there now. But the earlier ones didn't have shields on, or didn't have very good shields on. Filling silo, there were a couple of problems with that. One is after the fermentation process started, it would use up all the oxygen in the top of the silo. And if you intended to, if you didn't have an unloader in there, we never had one, we would crawl up there and throw the silage out. You could be asphyxiated, by not having any oxygen up there. It was just carbon dioxide. And so what we would do, we only filled one silo, so we left the tractor and the blower set up for about a week or 10 days by the silo, and before we'd go up there, we'd turn the tractor and the blower on, and it would blow air up and blow the air out of the top of the silo, maybe down the chute, and you let that run for a while, and then you had good air up there. The second problem is if you put your silage in too wet, you could get nitrogen oxide. It's a brown gas, and it usually it's heavy, so it would kind of sit at the bottom of the silo chute. And I remember one year I saw it, there was about 2 inches of it sitting there at the bottom. Well, when that was around, you worried about, if there was any of it above there. Normally you could see it, but if you get that in your lungs, it forms nitric acid and it burns the inside of your lungs, and it could kill you or permanently damage your lungs. So that was another hazard with filling silos when you didn't have silo unloaders. So I'll quit with that.
Thank you. Okay, we got a young lady who had her hand up. She would like to add more information. Right ahead.
Kathy Sixel, and we used to have husking bees. I don't know if the rest of you did. And I mean, talk about fun when you were kids. You had all these corn cobs, and they'd be on the barn floor, and the neighbors would come, and your uncles and aunts, and you'd sit all around the corn cobs, and you would take the outside off. And then the men would carry them into the granary or somewhere, or a dryer, and they would dry the cobs. And we would have pieces of cardboard with numbers on. And if you got a piece of cardboard, you got a prize when you came back into the house. And also you would have a very, very nice lunch. But that was nice entertainment for you when you were a child.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Frederick?
Okay, we got a gentleman who had his hand up, right ahead, please.
Fred Jacoby, talking, she just reminded me about a corn husking. My parents were good friends with Laverne and Sharon Brock's parents, Hilbert Zills and Robert Lutzies. And the corn husking parties were, I remember those, we used to just horse around as kids, but it was a lot of fun and a big social thing. And it was at night, you know, and it was in fall, it was cool, but you're on the barn floor, so it was okay. I wanted to mention Richard earlier referred, I think, to the danger of feeding a trash machine and those fingers. And some of you, I think it came up when the Schneiders were here and were the presenters once. Do you remember that?
Yes.
That Mr. Schneider, about where our farm is on Centerville Road, not quite a mile south of us, that Mr. Schneider, and I think his name was William, but I'm so mixed up, I think were a couple of William Schneiders. That's how he lost his life. Fell into the machine.
Wow.
It's gotta be awful. That's a long time ago.
Okay.
Rows, and then my younger sister, because I would pick them and I'd drop them on the row in between, and the truck would scatter that, or on either side.
Straddle it, yeah.
And then my sister, when the truck went over, she had to throw them up on there. And then I had brothers on this side and that side, and we could pick about 8 to 10 rows of sweet corn at one time.
Oh.
And that was one extra crop we did. And beans, did anybody pick beans here? Larry did? Oh, okay. Might have to talk to them, Jerry.
Okay, here we go. Thank you, Charlie. Good job. Okay, got a gentleman here who had an occupation in the past. Go right ahead, please.
Victor Schill.
Thank you, Victor.
I picked beans. Guys were getting a penny a pound. It was at that time. I remember we're paying for. But sometimes we cheat and put a stone in the pail. But no, it was fun picking. We had a big crowd. And I remember one time I was helping trash on my uncle's farm. And he said, take the team of horses home and load them. All of a sudden, the dog came barking. The horses took off one way and the wagon went one way. And all of a sudden, I was laying on the ground and shocks all around me. Because the dog frightened the horses and they took off like horses went to the trash machine, the wagon was laying on the ground. I remember that real good. But the dog scared them horses and they didn't know what to do. They chased them, hit them in the heel, bit them in the heel, and they took off. Okay. I remember that real good. I'm laying on the ground and shocks all around me. They come running. Did you get hurt? I said, no, I'm just laying here laughing my rear end off because it was funny.
Thank you. Very good. Okay, we got a young lady who had a thought here. Go right ahead, please.
Edith, let's see.
Thank you, Edith.
My dad planted beans every year. Every day we were in the bean field. And then when we would go to Valders to have them weighed in the evening, sometimes we would get an ice cream cone, and that was a big treat. Now think about that, what kids nowadays would do.
Not so great. Thank you. Okay, we got a lady here who raised her hand. Go right ahead, please.
Audrey Earl. I know my father was always borrowing us out to the neighbors.
Boy.
And picking stones. In the springtime you pick stones, and in the fall you pick potatoes. And I remember you'd work all afternoon, and if you got fed, you didn't get any money. But if you got a quarter, you didn't get fed.
Really?
And then about 10, 15 years ago, my grandson lived anyway, he got hired by the guy that had the field. And $5 an hour for picking up stones? I couldn't believe it. We were lucky if we got a quarter or got fed after working all afternoon.
Wow.
And picking up stones and potatoes isn't easy.
Yes, it's not easy. Thank you very much. Good. Okay, got a lady who raised her hand. Good.
I'm Alice Mathias. I remember when we were quite young, we used to pick beans, lived in Manitowoc, and we had to walk to the field. I don't even know where they were. It was beyond, maybe like the Redonce or some big farmer.
Okay.
And we'd end up with only getting a few cents. And we'd always stop, like he said, you got a penny a pound. I don't know if we got a penny a pound or not, but we used to always stop on the way back at the Jago's grocery store, and they
Yeah.
always had penny candy, and we'd spend half of our money, I think,
So you
at the
spend a
store.
half, all that work?
All that work, and then later on, after beans, then we'd have to pick raspberries, and that was a pain in the butt.
That too, yeah. Thank you for sharing, good. Thank you. Okay, we got a lady who raised her hand. Go right ahead, please.
Kathy Sixel. And another thing, another machine that people will lose fingers in was the corn sheller. I don't know if any of you know what the corn sheller is, but it took the dried corn off the cob, and your fingers got in there, and you did it by hand to make it go around, but it was a very dangerous item also, and that was one thing I know that we could not do at home because of the danger.
Yeah.
And there's one more question, or we're going to wind down. Anybody? Larry? Laverne? Any other?
Okay, we got a lady who raised her hand, and she's going to tell us a little something. Go right ahead.
Okay, I'm Laverne Schoenbrock.
Thank you.
Coming back to thrashing, we women worked our butts off, and in the evening when they were all done thrashing, the big shade tree outside with a half a keg of beer, there all the farmers are sitting drinking beer, and we had to look out to them because we were too young to go out and join them. But they all had their beer out underneath the big oak tree.
There you go. Sounds like a good thing for men. Thank you. Okay, got a gentleman here who is anxious to talk about something. Go right ahead.
Larry Sherman again.
Thank you,
We
Larry.
used to go picking by pickles with my uncle.
Okay.
And we always hid about 6 or 7 under a plant. So when you come to a pick the next time, they were nice and ripe to throw at the next guy.
The little army, huh? Thank you. Okay, got a gentleman here who has his hand up. Go right ahead, please.
Fred Jacoby. Laverne just reminded me of the end of the thrashing season. After we were done, we were 3 or 4 farmers, depending on which year, that worked together, and Otto Sixel owned the machine. He had the farm directly, immediately north of Louis Sigelco, where Dennis Gordygood lives now.
Okay.
And then there'd be the party. And of course it was an excuse for the men to play cards and drink Kimmel and stuff like that, and the kids ran around the dark, horsed around, but it was a big picnic. The Thrasher boss threw the picnic. And I think that happened other places too.
Very good, thank you. Okay, we got a young lady here who had raised her hand. Right ahead, please.
I'm Alice Mathias. I'm just wondering, how many were in the threshing crew? When these women had to cook, how many were they cooking for?
Good, thank you. Okay, we have a gentleman who raised his hand to answer a question on the floor of thrashing crews. How big usually were they?
Well, Fred Jacoby, it depends. Like we thrashed with Herbert Schutte and Otto Sixel and us most of the time. And there were a couple bachelors at Sixel's. Herbert was alone, but there were always some Schutte kids around. And then relatives would come out from town. The Kohler workers would come late in the afternoon. And so there might be 15, 20 people around the table, at least at the end of the day. And then there might be a hired man involved.
Okay.
And so it was something like that.
Sure.
It would vary, of course.
Yeah, but you're pretty close, I would say.
Paul has a comment?
Thank you. Okay, got a gentleman who wants to add on. He's going to identify himself.
I'm Paul Jacoby. In the last years I've worked with threshing, I worked for Howard Yeager. I think we did it with about 6 people. Howard would be cutting all day. Victor Stoltenberg would be on the chopper. Me and Victor's hired man would be hauling the loads. And Herbert Schutte would be running the thrash machine. And that was the crew.
Okay, okay, very good.
And we did 3 farms.
That was chopper thrashing now?
Chopper thrashing.
Oh, okay.
Both watered and dried, and
Yeah. All that cut
and
down.
Howard took those knives out of the machine. No, he ran straight in the belt in because it was all choppery.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, we had a wonderful evening tonight, and this young lady will tell us all about our wind downs, I guess, and what we covered today.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming and sharing all their wonderful memories of farming yesteryear. So our next meeting is June 11th, and so far, or no, let me see once, it is June 8th. And so far, I really don't know what we're going to do yet, but we'll find a subject again. So,
Okay.
Kathy Sixel Newton.
Thank you.
Richard Otto Wiegand, formerly Town Centerville, now Spooner, Wisconsin, and I'd like to thank everybody for coming. This was a wonderful discussion. I think it was a great topic, and I'm sorry we probably left a few of the city folks out of the discussion here, but you'll have your turn.
Thank you.
Paul Jacoby, Cleveland.
Thank you, Paul.
Leonard Mathias, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Alice Mathias, Cleveland.
Good, thank you.
Lois Crest, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Kathy Wagner, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Joe Kress, Township.
Thank you.
Walter Crest, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Larry Schoenbrook, husband.
Thank you.
Laverne Schoenbrook, husband.
Thank you very much.
Edith Lutzy, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Selma Vogel, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Marie Pippert, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Dan Schmidt, Elkhart Lake.
Very good.
Naomi Schmidt, Elkhart Lake.
Okay, very good tonight. Thank you.
Audrey Ertl,
Thank you. And where are you from, Audrey?
St. Nazian.
Thank you.
Marie Volan, Town of Sheboygan.
Good. Thank you.
Carl Ziegler, Newton.
Thank you, Carl.
Rick Firestorff, Mimi.
Thank you for coming.
Ellsworth Yeager, Sheboygan.
Thank you.
Will Balance, Cleveland.
Thank you.
Frederick Jacoby, Manitowoc.
Good.
Kay Schill, Glenbeulah.
Thank you.
Victor Schill, Glenbeulah.
Thank you.
Charlie Bauer, Newton.
Thank you very much. And this is Jerry O'Neill, the videographer for the evening, and an excellent exchange of ideas and old memories which we really cherish. So bring some more along for the next meeting, will you? And we'll sign her off with Kathy at this point.
Kathy Sixel, and I have one other comment. The last time that we thrashed, that was on the Sixel farm, was 1956, and then they started with the combine. I don't know how the rest of you, if you had the combine before that, but that was the last time we thrashed. So,
Okay.
see you all next month and have a safe journey home.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good, Kathy. Thank you.